Opinions on Concord? That's a spicy game. I can give you a few thoughts on it. One of my big thoughts on Concord that I don't see enough people talking about, or just a lot of people talking about, because Concord, at this point, very famously, did not have many people playing it, right? I think one of the things about Concord that people aren't talking about, in terms of its low player numbers, is it wasn't advertised at all. Like, at all. I didn't know about it. I had never heard of it. When it came out on Steam, I saw it was on Steam, and I thought it was just some indie game that didn't look super interesting to me, so I just, like, passed it up. There was no, there was no Steam takeover, there was no billboards, there was no ads on Twitch or anything like that. There wasn't any advertising for the game at all, so it got the feeling of the company didn't think it would succeed, and so they didn't put any effort into advertising it to, like, try to get people to play it. Which I think the reason its player numbers were so incredibly low. Whether or not it's a good game, that's a different question. But, like, when you have player numbers that low, I think one of the big reasons is that no one knows it exists, whether or not it's good. So that's just one thing I think that a lot of people aren't talking about, is the fact that the game didn't seem to be advertised, and I'm fairly certain that the majority of people who have heard of Concord did not know about it until they heard the negative stuff after release. So I think that's one thought I have on it. Another thought I have on it is it's kind of a case study in when you do things players say they want, it can actually be bad if it's not like what your competitors are doing. So the thing I mean by that is a lot of gamers, especially in NA, will say that we don't want games with microtransactions. We don't want games with skins that you have to pay for. We just want a full, complete experience for some small amount of money, and that's what we want, right? And that works for a lot of games. If you're making a game like, Black Myth Wukong, charging some amount of money for that and selling it, that's exactly what you should do. But every game is made within the context of the market that it's in. And in regards to Concord, all its competition is free-to-play, right? All its competition is free-to-play. And so it was probably also in trouble due to its business model of just being a paid product of like, hey, you have to pay $40 for this. And because, like, that's a death knell for that genre at this point, because all the competition is free-to-play. And so even though an American gamer might say free-to-play games are scummy because they try to take all your money with microtransactions, it's like, well, one of the reasons free-to-play games are so big, especially in the competitive multiplayer space, is that you can just get your friends to play it. It's really easy to get people to play free-to-play games, which is important in a competitive multiplayer game, because, you want a lot of people playing it to have good queue times, good matches, all that stuff. And so it seems to me like an incorrect business decision to make a game in that genre nowadays and charge for it when the competition is all free. This kind of happened to Heroes of Newerth. Heroes of Newerth, years and years and years ago, was going to be the next Dota. And then Dota 2 came out. But Heroes of Newerth, when it was in beta, was actually very successful. There's a lot of people playing it. And in beta it was free to play. And then they released Heroes of Newerth and they started charging for it. And that was kind of like a death knell to their game, especially since then, after that, games like Dota 2 and League of Legends came out and they were free. And at the time, the game in the genre that was to be played was Dota, which was also free to some degree. And so I think Heroes of Newerth, regardless of how good or bad it was, I thought overall it was a pretty solid game when I played it. I think that's another example of, by not matching the product strategy as some of the other people in the genre, or matching or doing better than, they actually made it harder for the game to succeed. Because they had a paid product that was competing against a bunch of MOBAs that were free. Artifact, another example. Artifact was like, hey, players want to pay for card packs, and that's the only way to get them. And your competition is like stuff like stuff like Hearthstone, which players are not paying exclusively for card packs. That's one way to get them, but you can also get them for free by playing the game. And so I think one of the things that doomed Artifact was this similar thing of, a card game you had to pay for has a hard time competing with all the other online card games that you don't have to pay for. So that's a thought. Why do you think there aren't any other popular MOBAs nowadays? By popular, I mean almost as popular as League, not even Dota 2. So first of all, there are. The other popular MOBAs are these two games. Let me show you. These games are giant, massive, huge. We have this one. Give me the, there we go. We got this one. That one's very, very, very popular, especially in Southeast Asia. And then you've got this one, which is quite literally the largest game in the entire world. Honor of Kings, or King of Glory, or whatever it's called nowadays. This game here is the biggest game in the entire world. It has the most players out of any game in the world. It actually eventually replaced League of Legends with that. League of Legends at one point was one of the biggest games in the world. Not one of, but the biggest game in the world. It's no longer the case, but League of Legends was huge. King of Glory, or Honor of Kings, or Arena of Valor, I forget what it's called in the US. Biggest game in the world. So there are other MOBAs out there that have been very successful. So we'll start with that, but they're on mobile. In terms of on PC, you have League of Legends, and you have Dota. And I think one of the reasons, like, the question is, like, why aren't there any other MOBAs, right? I think one of the reasons is, for a genre like this, you can't just be good. You have to be transcendent. Because you are competing with games that already have all the time of millions of people. So as an example, let's say a new MOBA came out that was, we're just going to say it was just as good as League, okay? New MOBA comes out, it's got good characters, good gameplay, it's just as good as League of Legends. That MOBA might fail. In fact, let's say it was 20% better than League of Legends. Like, legit, it came out, great characters, great gameplay, and it was legitimately a 20% better game than League of Legends. That MOBA might fail. And the reason is because how are you going to get people to play it when they're already playing League of Legends and Dota? It is hard to convince years and years of players who have all this built-up excitement and skill to go play something else that's in the same genre. This is, you saw this with MMOs. There was this period of time after WoW came out where all these companies were pursuing the MMO golden goose. They saw WoW, they were like, wow, it's so successful, we could do that too. And a lot of companies made a lot of legitimately good MMOs that completely failed. And the reason wasn't because they were bad, it's because they weren't WoW. And there was no reason to play them over WoW. And so you just kept playing WoW. And eventually, we have Final Fantasy 14, I think, 15, 13, 14, there we go. And that one managed to actually compete in the space with WoW in a very good way, and like, it's freaking awesome. Great job to Square Enix with that one. But like, there's a reason that like only WoW and Final Fantasy 14 are really like the top MOBAs. Like, a lot of MOBAs just don't compete in the space because people are already invested in WoW. And so I think to capture a new audience, you need to do something not just better, but different, which I think Deadlock is doing, by the way. I think Deadlock is a very cool, compelling riff on a MOBA. I think it has a high chance to be very successful. So I'm excited to see what Deadlock does. Or you need to find a new space. So one of the reasons Honor of Kings and Mobile Legends do really, really well is that they're the ones who took over the mobile space. Because remember, Wild Rift, we didn't make Wild Rift until years later. And so they're the ones who kind of ate all the part in the mobile space. And so they're like, hey, we have a great MOBA in mobile. Play it here. Or you might have to play to a new audience. So as an example, if there was a MOBA that came out that really, really played to high schoolers, and it got really, really big on in high school, because high schoolers, a lot of high school players, they haven't played League of Legends. They're not really super interested in League of Legends, right? And so if there was a MOBA that came out that managed to capture that group of players, that could also probably be really huge. Oh yeah, Lost Ark is also huge. But mainly getting at that, the hard part about making a competitive multiplayer game in a genre that's already saturated, like say League of Legends, like the MOBAs, is that you can't just be good. You can't even just be better. You have to be far better, or far different, or for a different audience to really be able to find your footing. So that's the challenge. I was talking about Concord. I think Concord is an example there where it's like, regardless of your thoughts on like stuff like the character design or something, one of the hard parts about Concord is like, who is going to move to Concord when they're already playing Overwatch, when they're already playing CSGO or Valorant, when they're already playing these other games in the genre, when they're already playing Team Fortress 2, right? That's another challenge that a game like Concord will run into when it releases, is they're jumping into this ocean of games that is already very established and very polished and fairly good. And so finding their footing there is important. I think the last thing I would say about Concord is I think their character design is very questionable. Their characters, the way I would describe like maybe one of the things that's off about their character design is their characters don't seem to be designed to have much appeal to many groups of players. And when I say appeal, I want to like really note that I'm not just talking about things like sex appeal. Characters can be appealing for many, many, many different ways. And if you look at Concord's character roster, not many of their characters come off as appealing. An example of like appeal, like what I'm talking about, because again, it's not just sex appeal. A lot of people, when they hear appeal, they're like, oh, so you got to make things sexy. No, I'm not talking about that. Making a character, you know, physically attractive is one way to make them appealing. But like an example I like bringing up when talking about character appeal is the difference between old Urgot and new Urgot. These characters are embracing very similar themes, but one of these characters, I would argue, does it much better and in a much more appealing way. This Urgot has this appeal of like being this body horror, powerful crab man. Now, obviously, he's not going to be the most appealing character in League of Legends. He's going to have a bit more of a niche audience. But I think to the audience that might like a character like Urgot, the new Urgot hits that audience very hard. It makes you feel powerful and strong and creepy in a appealing way versus the old guy was just kind of gross, right? And so I think one of the things that Concord's characters run into is kind of a lot of the choices that were made for them don't result in a character that's like super compelling to any specific audience. And I think that's the hard part. Like, as an easy example here, like compare Concord's character designs to like Deadlock's character designs. Deadlock and Concord, I think both have what I would call as like non-standard character designs. Non-standard meaning like, you know, they feel like the theme and the vibe of both of those games feels pretty different from what you normally see. But a lot of Deadlock's character designs just have this style and flair to them that ends up feeling missing from a number of Concord's character designs.